This is Mr. Hannon. Welcome to What the Format. Today we're going to go over simplifying square roots. Now, I did a video earlier on simplifying radicals. Square root is a specific type of radical where you're looking for the same number that times itself one time. So basically, I guess times itself one time is equal to a number. So for instance, square root of 4 is square root of 2 times square root of 2. So here's your 2. It's the same number times itself one time is going to be equal to 2. So square root of 4 is 2 because 2 times 2 is 4. 3 times 3 is 9, so the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, what I've done here is I've broken it down into its factored form. Okay, one way to simplify square root is just to prime factor the number. Well, what do I mean by prime factor? Well, let's take a look at 42. Okay, if I'm taking the square root of 42, it sure looks like that should be able to simplify. Okay, my brain is telling me it should simplify, but let's factor it out. That is 6 times 7, which is then 2 times 3 times 7. Please notice that these are now prime numbers. That's what prime factoring means. You break a number down into the prime numbers that multiply to it. In other words, the product of prime numbers. Okay, prime factor. It has to be product of prime numbers. 2 times 3 times 7. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 times 7 is 42. Please notice that there are how many of each number? 1. For square root, we determined there have to be at least what? 2 of the same number for it to have a square root. Now, I did square root of 4, square root of 9. Those are typically the easiest ones to start with. Notice then I went to 8. Well, what is 8? Well, 8 is 4 times 2, which then that breaks down into the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Now, important to remember with square roots, with radicals, when you're multiplying and the root is the same, you can split it up into the same root as a product of the same root. Don't do this with a sum or difference. Only with a product or quotient can you combine the numbers inside to a single radical. Okay, so we could do root 2 times root 2 and write it as root 4. Okay, if we can combine it, we can also then split it up. And when you're simplifying square roots, you want to split it up. Okay, so we went from square root of 4 to square root of 2 times square root of 2, and whenever you take a square root times itself, it's 2. That's something to remember. If I have the square root of a times the square root of a, that's always just going to be a. Okay, because basically, when you take square root times the square root, you take the square root of a, that's the number, square root of a times the number, when you multiply, it's going to be back to a. Something you want to memorize. Okay, so what we're trying to do then is factor these numbers and see if there's a perfect square in there. Now, let's go to 84. Okay, if I have the square root of 84, you can see that that's what? 42 times 2. Well, 42, if we go back and prime factor it, is 2 times 3 times 7 times 2. Notice what I have here. I have a set of 2's. Okay, that means when you take the square root, one of those 2's comes out. Just one. Okay, when you have a pair, one comes out and cross off the pair. Now, whatever's left stays inside. 3 times 7, but we don't write it as 3 times 7. We multiply it back out. 2 root 21. That is considered the simplified version of the square root of 84. So that's how you simplify square roots. I'm hoping that if you remember this and you remember that you can break them down, you're looking for pairs of numbers. When you have a pair of numbers, that's what comes out of the radical. Whatever doesn't pair up stays inside the radical. And these are the kind of the simplest versions, but obviously you can see maybe you did 8. Well, what's 8? Square root of 4 times square root of 3. Okay, square root of 3 doesn't simplify, but square root of 4 does too, so that'd be 2 root 3. And then you just keep going on. Now, another way to do it too, if you wanted to, is memorize your square roots up to a certain number, and then memorize multiples of those. Because that's really all you're looking for, is you're looking for, in a number, if you factor it, is there a square root hiding in there somewhere? Prime factoring will always reveal the pairs of numbers, or if you're doing other radicals, obviously you wouldn't be looking for just 2, you might be looking for more than that, but prime factoring lets you know how many of each factor is there. If you have enough to match your root, in this case square root 2, then you pull it out. But a shortcut is, if for instance you recognize that 27 is 9 times 3, then you can just take the square root of 9, 3 root 3. You don't actually have to finish the prime factoring. Prime factoring is just a way that always works, and that's the safe way to start until you kind of start to see the pattern. And then from there you can adjust. And this is the key to algebra. Rules are what they are. You need to learn to do the rules and go through the problems the long way first. It's a pain in the butt. Nobody wants to spend extra time on a math problem. But here's the thing is, If you go through it the right way and break it down and practice it the right way first, your brain really grasps the concept, okay? And that's important because these concepts like simplifying square roots are usually hidden inside of a bigger problem. And the bigger the problem, you have to break it down. And if your brain isn't used to breaking things down into pieces and you haven't walked it through the process and taught it to think through the process, it gets overwhelmed. And that's what's happening usually at some point in Algebra 1. Students' brains get overwhelmed. They can't think through the problem, so they just give up. Okay, so train your brain to go through it the right way. That's what prime factoring does. If you take a bunch of numbers and you practice prime factoring them and then simplifying radicals, and you build up to it and you realize it's just a big process and it just builds on itself and builds on itself. Well, that's what algebra does. Okay, because typically when you're going to simplify a square root, you're going to be doing it inside of, like the square root of 84 here. You might have 3 plus or minus root 84 over 2. See, that would be from, say, the quadratic formula. And then that would have to simplify. Okay, now we simplified it here to 2 root 21. Important to note that this wouldn't simplify any further. This would be your answer. Well, Mr. Hanna, 2 over 2 simplifies. That it does, but negative 3 over 2 does not. And that's, see another, all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute. I had to use quadratic formula to get to this. Then I had to simplify this radical, and now I have to know whether that cancels or not. See, that's a lot in a single problem. And that's where students are getting lost. It only takes one of those things to get wrong. You simplify this, right? Negative 3 plus or minus root 21. And on a multiple choice test, there's a good chance that answer or choice will be there. You think you got it right, but you actually got it wrong, and you don't really even know why you got it wrong. And then that snowballs, and at some point you're like, wait, I just keep getting all these test questions wrong, and I just don't know what I'm doing. That's not necessarily true. It starts, though, with doing things the right way and recognizing what part of the problem you're doing. So if I use quadratic formula to get to here, I need to isolate that in my mind and just do that and get the 2 root 21. Then I go and finish the rest of the problem. But you have to train your brain to think that way. And unfortunately, today a lot of young people aren't doing that. They just want the answer. They just want to get through it as fast as possible, which is understandable, but detrimental to your mental growth and cognitive abilities. And that's what they are actually finding a lot now. The cognitive abilities of young people are less than what they should be. And they're relating it to technology. Letting things do the work for you instead of walking yourself through it and forcing your brain to see through it. You got to train your brain. It's like any other muscle in your body. You got to train it to do what you want it to do. Hopefully this helps you see how to train it to do square roots. And then that when you run into a problem where you have to simplify square root, hopefully this helps and makes a difference. Anyway, thank you for watching What the Format. This is Mr. Hanna. Happy mathing.